I recently did a video where I talked about the best Pokemon from every generation, so today let's talk about the worst, the absolute stinkers, the Pokemon that when you pull them, all you can do is curse your rotten luck and scream, "Why, God, why?" This time, to make things easier, I'll be exclusively focusing on how each Pokemon performs in their respective region, and our criteria for evaluation will be the same as before: the objective strengths, or rather weaknesses of the Pokemon, the utility of the Pokemon in a typical Nuzlocke, and what encounters you miss out on if you have the misfortune of coming across one of these duds. This criteria is important because the goal of this video isn't to talk about the absolute weakest Pokemon in every game. That would be an extremely predictable and not very insightful list. Rather, my goal is to break down why certain Pokemon are bad for Nuzlocking specific games. And let's get the necessary disclaimer out of the way: technically, every Pokemon is usable in some way, shape, or form, especially if you play on Switch mode, or over level, or use items, or whatever. The beauty of Nuzlocks is finding out how to turn that F-tier genetically impaired accident into an unexpected Godslayer. I get that. So just don't take it personally when your favorite lovable loser ends up taking some strays throughout this video. I'm talking to you, Unpheasant apologists, simmer down. But let's kick things off with Generation 1, the Cantonian 151, and there's not that many capital T terrible encounters here. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are some true stinkers, like Lickitung, who's got nothing going on, physically, mentally, or emotionally, but at least in Kanto playthroughs, this bald sex pest is a trade encounter, so you'd have to go out of your way to get one, and you wouldn't be sacrificing anything to do so. The worst Nuzlocke encounters are those that stink to high heaven and take away other more desirable teammates. But the fact of the matter is that most of the best Pokemon in Kanto are either completely guaranteed or on so many routes that there are very few encounters that'll result in missing a game-changing Pokemon. Funny enough though, Pikachu is one of them. If you catch Pokemon's rodent mascot in Viridian Forest, you're probably missing out on Butterfree or Beedrill, both of which do pretty well in the early game where Pikachu struggles. Alternatively, if you catch the Squeakster in the power plant, congratulations, you missed out on the only Steel-type Pokemon in the game. Paris is hot garbage, especially in earlier generations where his moveset is beyond disgraceful. And if you get him in Mount Moon, you're missing out on Geodude, Zubat, or Clefairy, who are all definitely better than Mr. 20 base power Leech Life. Meowth doesn't actually rob you of any better encounters, but also doesn't really do anything himself, unless you're getting guaranteed critical hits with Slash in Gen 1. And if you're playing Gen 1, great, you've discovered the most broken games to ever spawn a multi-billion-dollar media franchise. But none of these Pokemon are bad enough to be the worst. So my pick is Onix. Yes, I know, I'm the guy who hates Onix, and perhaps this is a little biased. Admittedly, Onix is pretty solid at dealing with normal types like Giovanni's Kangaskhan. But you know who else is good at that? Machoke, who you won't get in Rock Tunnel if you stumble into this stupid string of rocks connected by half a dozen neurons. In fact, every other Pokemon you can get in Rock Tunnel, or Victory Road for that matter, is infinitely more useful than Onix, who by the way can't evolve into Steelix in Kanto. And unlike in Sinnoh, you can't even use Onix as an early game wall since you don't get him until after the 3rd gym badge. So congratulations buddy, you've sucked your way into another Flygon HG video. Moving on to the 100 Johtonian Pokemon, we've got a slight problem, because though many of these new additions do stink like a Trubbish on a hot summer night, the Johto games do this charming, quirky little thing where it's very difficult to actually find any Johto Pokemon. Great game design. So a lot of trash encounters like Quillfish and Yanma are basically non-existent in a Nuzlocke. Fellow Skidmark Macargo can't even be found in Johto other than via Primo's eggs, so again, you'll have to go out of your way to do that. Though I did want to highlight Macargo because that is a truly terrible Pokemon in Hoenn, where you're far more likely to find one. If you somehow manage to keep Slugma alive until level 38, you'll be rewarded with a Fire Rock type right in time to explore the eastern half of Hoenn, which is quite literally 70% water. Anyways, Ladian is a pretty horrendous Pokemon, from typing to stats to level up moveset to vibe. Okay, that last one isn't true, I'm just being mean. Ariados is equally atrocious, since despite a moderately more logical stat spread, he doesn't have the decency to evolve before Whitney, which seems extremely cruel. But you can avoid both of them entirely by just playing the game during typical working hours. Boss makes $1, I make a dime. That's why I play Pokemon on company time. Aren't you self-employed? Hey, shut up. Sunkern sucks, and though Sunflora secretly has one of the highest special attack stats in the game, grass types are very bad in Johto. Plus, by getting her in the national park, it means that you lost your chance at scoring a Scyther or Pinsir from the bug catching contest. There's also the gimmick Pokemon Unknown, which you'll be very hard pressed to find a use for, though you will once again need to intentionally catch one, and at that point it's better to just save your Pokeball. So instead of those stinkers, I'm choosing Delibird. Now admittedly, this feathered up turd isn't even accessible in Gold or its remake, but if you're playing Silver, Crystal, or Soul Silver, there is nothing worse than strolling into Ice Path in the hopes of getting a Dragon Buster and being stuck with this cuck instead of Swinub or Jinx. Now technically, Delibird can still do some damage against Lance's dragons with max special attack and speed EVs, but even then, it's gonna depend on your Santa Bird's IVs and nature, so in standard Nuzlocke, it's always better to just use another Ice type, or Starmie with Ice Beam. Welcome to the Avengers of Sucking, Delibird, you'll fit right in. You hear that music? That means we've made it to Gen 3, which in my extremely subjective and nostalgically biased opinion has the best music in the franchise. And if you want to jam out to Hoenn's beats on the go, you're gonna need a quality and affordable pair of earbuds, like the everyday earbuds from the sponsor of this video, Raycon. I love using my everyday earbuds every day when I'm playing with Poppy in the yard or going for a run. Their ergonomic design means that they fit comfortably in my ear without falling out, and a 32-hour battery life means that you don't have to worry about your earbuds dying mid-run, forcing you to listen to nothing but the labored breathing and the slow trudging of your feet, resulting in the realization that your athletic peak is behind you, long gone, not unlike the youthful exuberance that has been extinguished by the relentless passage of time. Flygon, are you okay? The everyday earbuds come in a variety of colors, and you can get a protective case cover with wireless charging capabilities for even more personalization. So if you're interested in getting your own pair of everyday earbuds, risk-free thanks to their 30-day happiness guarantee, now's the perfect time to save big with Raycon's Black Friday deal. Go to buyraycon.com/Flygon today to get up to 30% off site-wide. That's right, you'll get up to 30% off everything on Raycon's website when you go to buyraycon.com/Flygon. Thanks so much to Raycon for sponsoring this video. Now, let's get back to ranking the worst Nuzlocke encounters. The Hoennian 135 has several notable train wrecks, chief among them the globular Castform and the heart-shaped Love Disc. Both are frail, weak, and bad, but Castform is a gift encounter, and Love Disc isn't found until the very end of the game, where you have to intentionally fish for one. I'm inclined to go with Exploud here, since he's a classic jack-of-all-trades, master-of-none type Pokemon. Whismur is soft and feeble and does nothing for the first two gyms. Loudred is slightly less soft and slightly less feeble, but his moveset means that he's still completely useless against Watson, Flannery, and Norman. The Walking Boombox does have some utility against Winona, I guess, and then Exploud is a solid answer against Tate and Liza since he learned Shadow Ball by TM. Plus, Stab Return is strong enough to be usable in the late game if you don't have a better option, so as much as I like to dump on this Pokemon, he's not completely useless, but Spinda is. With a base stat of 360, get it, it's like a circle, Spinda spins in a circle, cool Pokemon. This poor panda bear can't do anything. He can't outspeed, he can't take one on the chin, and he can't do big damage. The dude is mediocre incarnate, and by getting stuck with his dizzy ass on Route 113, you're missing out on the coveted Skarmory, so yeah, this is an easy pick for Hoenn's King of Crap. Many of the 107 Gen 4 Pokemon are quite powerful, and like with Kanto, there's a lot of repeatable encounters such that most playthroughs in Sinnoh will feature the same handful of MVPs, but you can still step on a few landmines. Luxray is one of the few electric types in the game, and though he's solid if he has Intimidate, a Rivalry Luxray is a massive disappointment since his base stats and mediocre move pool aren't enough to compensate for that loss in utility. A lack of a physical electric type attack over base 65 power really hurts Luxray, especially in the late game when it's kill or be killed. Pachirisu is another electric type, and getting her means you're less likely to score a Buizel, which is one of the best answers into Fantina's Mismagius in Platinum. And despite her world champion status, Pachirisu lacks the stats and move pool to be particularly helpful in a standard Nuzlocke, outside of being a fairly solid Gyarados check, which in and of itself isn't entirely without merit. If you're in the business of lubing up trees with honey, a male Burmy is probably the second worst thing you can get, since it means you're stuck with Mothim instead of the significantly better Wormadam. In later generations, Mothim gets Quiver Dance, but in his debut games, this is another entry in the long list of lousy bug flying types. A Gardenia counter is his one and only utility, but pretty much anything else from a honey tree can do that at least as well, and probably provides additional utility later on. Luminion is Sinnoh's residential fish that sucks, but at least has the decency of largely staying out of the way. Chatot is a skosh more invasive and has the chance of spoiling a potential Electabuzz or Magnemity from Route 222, while also providing no purpose other than giving teenagers in the late aughts another reason to scream profanities into the microphone of their very real Nintendo DS. So he is a solid runner-up, but Chatot merely adopted the mediocrity. Our Sinnoh champion was born in it, molded by it. The worst Nuzlocke encounter from Generation 4 is Carnivine, yet another grass type that Game Freak forgot to do literally anything with. This Pokemon is awful. Grass types already don't do well in Sinnoh, but I mean, look at this level up moveset. Bro learns no utility moves and is stuck with Vine Whip as his main stab move until level 47. What are we doing here? And let's not forget that if you happen to get stuck with this googly-eyed it's at the expense of every other infinitely cooler Pastoria Marsh encounter. You wanted Drapion? Too bad you got Carnivine. You wanted Toxicroak? Too bad, Carnivine. You wanted Tangela? Yanma? Tropius? This thing's got me defending Tropius. I'll admit that you're super unlikely to actually get Carnivine unless you really want him for some reason, but that's just a testament to how bad this guy really is that I'm still crowning him as the worst Nuzlocke encounter in Sinnoh. You know, Flygon, I gotta say, I'm really impressed that you didn't take a dig at Garchomp here. It would have been really easy to, and it shows real growth that you kept things Yeah, you know what? Forget everything I just said. Garchomp is definitely the worst Nuzlocke encounter in Gen 4. Bro can't even learn Earthquake, and you call yourself a Dragon Ground type. But wait, Flygon doesn't learn Earthquake either. Unova's 156 Pokemon feature a sizable amount of pretty lousy encounters, likely due to the fact that Gen 5 was clearly meant to be somewhat of a soft reset for the Pokemon franchise until they changed their mind. And we could talk about any number of these underwhelming Pokemon at length, but let's skip the foreplay and go straight to the main event, because I've got my number one with a bullet, and honestly, he's the reason for this entire video. This guy. This Pokemon is horrendous. I hate Beheeyem so much. Now, you might look at these stats and think, hey, 125 special attack, 95 special defense? Surely this can't be totally useless, but I promise you he is. You see that speed stat? Yeah, that means that Beheeyem is getting outsped by anything with a pulse. Sure, Beheeyem has decent bulk, but it's not enough to protect the extraterrestrial from super effective Dark, Ghost, or Bug-type moves. And you know who has super effective Dark, Ghost, or Bug-type moves? Everyone! Elgyem doesn't even evolve until level 42, which is roughly after the 6th gym leader, and I'm not exaggerating when I say that almost every single relevant Pokemon in the Unovan late game has a way to outspeed and hit Elgyem for super effective damage. This is a comically useless Pokemon, and to make matters worse, if you get this unidentified flying oaf, it means you didn't get Chandelure, one of the best Pokemon in the game, though to be honest that's on you since Chandelure is guaranteed on the 2nd floor of Celestial Tower. But still, in a game that has a literal garbage Pokemon, Beheeyem takes the cake as the worst possible Nuzlocke encounter in Unova. I'm open to differences in opinions on everything else, but this one's objective fact. Okay, I got a little heated there, so fortunately I have a chance to cool down with Gen 6. Since they only introduced 72 new Pokemon, there's not much room for too many disappointments. Meowstic, for example, is not a bad Pokemon by any means, but deserves a mention here simply because if you catch one on Route 6, it means you missed out on Aegislash, which is a fantastic Pokemon that can really trivialize some of the game's biggest threats. Normally, early game Pokemon, despite being weak and outclassed by the end of the playthrough, tend to still be pretty solid encounters at the beginning of your journey. So, Pokemon like Raticate, Furret, and Bibarel, in my opinion, shouldn't really be considered in this video. But Kalos' normal-type rodent, Diggersby, is the exception. This Pokemon is really just not very good. Despite a solid level-up moveset and the always useful secondary ground typing, Diggersby just doesn't have the raw stats to do much of anything. His attack stat in particular is extremely lacking due to the fact that his hidden ability is Huge Power. But since hidden abilities are mostly non-existent in a Nuzlocke, Big Chungus is pretty much dead weight. And unlike in previous generations, the encounter tables of early routes in Kalos are very diverse, meaning that you're going to be missing out on a fair deal of significantly better teammates. Definitely not the worst Pokemon in the world, but due to the limited number of Colosian critters to choose from, Diggersby does win the title of Gen 6's weakest link. Alola introduces slightly more Pokemon to the franchise than the previous generation, with 86 new species, though since 25 of them are legendaries or Ultra Beasts, we have an equivalent dearth of options to choose from. For similar reasons to Kalos' Diggersby, you could argue that Gumshoos is an extremely mediocre regional rodent. He's too slow to be a sweeper, too frail to be a tank, and you're likely to have much better alternatives to Gumshoos on every route you might encounter one. Pyukumuku is a Pokemon whose entire gimmick is doing damage after it dies, which is obviously not great for a Nuzlocke, but as with most gimmick Pokemon, they have the decency to stay largely out of the way. Bruxish is an absolutely unsettling and bizarre concept for a Pokemon, and unfortunately, she also happens to be in that oh-so-common sweet spot of being both too frail and not strong enough to be of any real use, especially in Ultra Sun and Moon, where everything in the game is on the Pokemon equivalent of EPO. But my choice for Alola, and believe me, it really breaks my heart to do this, is Lurantis. Fomantis may be the cutest son of a gun to ever grace this planet, but unfortunately he is very weak and gets introduced on Akala Island during possibly the hardest part of the entire game. Lurantis is quite powerful, but since you don't get her until level 34, well into the Ula Ula Island trials, it's really difficult to get utility out of this Pokemon until the end of the mid-game, and by that point, grass types struggle to have much use. The biggest threats tend to have ways to hit them for super effective damage, and with such a low speed stat, you're really going to struggle to find ways to safely bring this guy in on anything other than resisted attacks. Really cool Pokemon, one of my favorites from Alola, but sadly she's just not very good and takes away from much better potential encounters, like Vikavolt and Alola Dugtrio from Route 5, or Comfey, Passimian, Oranguru, Pinsir, and even Serena from Lush Jungle. The 96 Pokemon introduced in Generation 8 are sprinkled throughout very crowded encounter tables, so just like in the previous two generations, opportunity cost plays a much bigger role in each potential new teammate. Fortunately, most of the Galarian Pokemon are pretty solid, but Cramorant certainly leaves a bit to be desired. Gen 2 stats and an ability that is much cooler in theory than it is actually useful, plus stiff water flying competition from Gyarados and even Mantine mean that this Pokemon is destined for the box. There are other equally underwhelming Pokemon, be it Grapploct, Galarian Rapidash, or Ice-Q, but all of these guys can do at least something. Galarian Stunfisk just sucks. I know it's a meme to pretend to actually like Stunfisk, and that's cool, everybody needs a hobby, but this Pokemon is useless. In Galar, Stunfisk has traded his secondary electric typing for a steel typing, gotten an absolutely nonsensical ability and Stabliss signature move, and continues to have a baffling level up moveset. As a reminder, this is somehow a ground steel type Pokemon. I'll fess up to never having actually used this Pokemon, so maybe I'm missing some sort of secret unlocked potential, but I fail to see how this fella can do anything at all, and by scooping him up in Galar Mine number 2, you're missing out on much better Pokemon, many of which can help against Kabu, who is probably the hardest gym leader in the game. You know who doesn't do shit against Kabu? Galarian Stunfisk, but hey, at least his bear trap concept is pretty fun. With that, we've made it to the 120 newest Pokemon from Paldea. In the last video, I got the most feedback about my Gen 9 choice, and I'll admit, not even mentioning Skeledirge was a bit of an oversight. I still do think that one-shotting with guaranteed critical hit Flower Tricks from Speedy Meowscarada is marginally better than a slow setup sweep via Torch Song and Flame Charge, but that's the glory of opinions. And it speaks to the fact that a lot of the Paldean Pokemon are very good, even the Gay Duck, so choosing the worst Pokemon is tricky. You do have your usual low BST slop like Spidops and Oinkologne, but they're useful enough in the early game that you can't be too bummed when you get them from the first few areas. Squawkabilly is a Pokemon that only exists because someone forgot that they already made Chatot, and essentially functions as a smaller, shittier Staraptor, but as a single stager, he's solid enough in the mid-game. Pokemon like Mabostiff and Bombardier do feel pretty underwhelming, though they aren't offensively bad, and Cyclizar, despite being the worst dragon type in the franchise, is still a dragon type and another single stager that you can get fairly early. So my choice for Gen 9 is Wugtrio, a Pokemon that bravely asks, what if Dugtrio but with 0 immunities and 20 years of power creep resulting in extremely bad base stats? Look, the only reason regular Dugtrio isn't lumped in with the rest of this video's backwater trash is that in the Kanto games, he serves as a guaranteed counter to Lieutenant Surge's electric types. Plus, Stab Earthquake is never a bad thing, and a 100 base attack stat used to actually be pretty solid before Game Freak learned about bigger numbers. But fast forward 2 decades, and they decided that for design's sake, Wugtrio would have identical stats to the now extremely mediocre Dugtrio. And not just that, they also decided to give Wugtrio Gooey, an ability that drops the foe's speed when Wugtrio is hit by a move that makes physical contact. Kinda cool, except for the fact that Wugtrio has 35 HP and 50 defense. What physical contact move isn't gonna just kill this pathetic excuse for a Pokemon? They didn't even give the poor bastard Flip Turn, which, I don't know, would have been at least something. Instead, Wugtrio gets a signature move in Triple Dive, aka Surging Strikes at home. But everything about this Pokemon can be called mediocre at best, and for that reason, he's the worst Nuzlocke encounter from Paldea. So here we are, we've assembled an all-star roster of terrible Pokemon. My choices for the worst Nuzlocke encounter from every generation. Let me know which Pokemon you would pick in the comments down below, and as always, thank you so much for watching. It's been a nice break to get to do some different style videos, and I really do appreciate all the support. So if you want to see more videos like this, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Or don't, I don't know, but I do know that you should consider joining my Patreon to get early access to videos. Stay tuned for more Nuzlocke content, and until then, remember to always, always, always play around the critical hit.